So we're going to be in chapter 5 of Deuteronomy. This is the giving of the law, the 10 Commandments that Moses had. And so hopefully we can look at this, like Chris said, with a fresh set of eyes this morning. And if you haven't watched Chris's background video, I highly recommend it. So I think there's some new perspectives on this. And I also want us to look at this, and this is kind of a theme, especially throughout Deuteronomy, is look to the promises that apply to us today. Because the Word is living and breathing, and we, through our adoption, through our children of Abraham, and these promises are for us as well. So there's a part that's literal, and there's a part that's figurative that we apply today. And the promised land and the provision, and even when your car breaks down in the middle of nowhere, right? So all of those type of things. So with that being said, I'll let Chris do a little intro.
I thought it was interesting that different faith traditions divide up the 10 Commandments differently. And you think, well, there's 10 Commandments. Well, no, actually, there's actually 12 different statements. But yet God says, I'm giving you these 10 statements. And we're like, okay, well, which 10? So a couple of them are like, no other gods before me, not make any graven images. A lot of people combine that into one, whereas some traditions don't. And then the last one about coveting your neighbor's wife versus desiring your neighbor's household and things. A lot of people separate those or combine them into one, and different combinations of that get you to the 10. So it's just interesting the different perspectives. We're going to look at the first one when we get to, I think it's verse 6, that it doesn't look like a commandment. It just says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. And yet the Jewish reckoning of all the 10 is that's the first commandment. And you go, well, that's not a commandment. Well, because the phrase 10 commandments never actually appears in the Bible. It's in our English translations, but underneath it just says 10 sayings or 10 words. And so because I am the Lord your God, it's a foundational. If we recognize that, then we won't have any problem with the rest of them. And I think I love how that's called out.
Yeah, and you know, looking at this side of the cross, we can substitute Jesus. So, you know, kind of like what we said this morning, you could say, if you were to bring this full circle to today, you would say Jesus who died on the cross and saved me, as opposed to Egypt,
right?
The God who brought me out of Egypt, right? And they both work because Jesus, like we talked about last week, literally he wrote, right? The Lord's finger wrote the commandments. So,
and one of my sources picked up, God didn't give them the 10 Commandments while they're still in Egypt and then say, okay, if you keep these, then I'll save you. He saved them first, and then he gave the 10 Commandments. So obedience is a result of the gift that's already been given to us. And that was really enlightening for me, because how often have we been taught, well, that's back then. You know, we're under grace now. Well, they were under grace too, because it was only by the grace of God that they got saved from Egypt. And it's His mercy. And Cody and I have talked about this. It's like, okay, if all the things the church teaches, if Satan wouldn't change anything, then we might not be on the right track. And there's a couple of those in here that have just been taught generation, year after year, going way back even to the Reformation, where they've taught, oh, we don't need to worry about certain things. Well, if Satan would say, you don't need to worry about that, and that would intentionally just derail our relationship with God, then that would not be one of those things.
Exactly. Okay, in our usual quick fashion, would someone like to read verse 1?
Moses called all Israel and said to them, Hear, O Israel, that is the judgment which I speak to you. Your hearing say, that you may learn them and be careful in the observing them. Observe them.
Okay, so catch the verbs here. The ones that apply to us. You can put your name in there. You know, that you hear, you learn, and you observe, right? So this kind of goes back to our James 1:22 and our Acts 17.
Yeah, and this is not scientific observation where you sit and you wait for them to happen. This is like keep them, do them, act them out. You know, in that sense of observe.
So we need to hear, learn, and observe. So this is if you're wondering why something isn't going right in your life, it may be one of those problems, right? It could be if you're doing a root cause analysis. Maybe you're hearing, but you're not learning, or you're hearing and learning, and it's all up here, but you're not observing here in the heart, right? Or there's an area of your life that you've said, you've kind of given God the Heisman, like, this is my closet, we don't want to open that area, because you and I both know that there's some dirt in there, and we're not going to go there, Jesus, and you just kind of shut the door on that area of your life, and then you wonder why you're having all these issues, right? Like, Jesus wants all of you. I've heard it say it's not extreme makeover. It's like, no, we're going to wipe the house, foundation and all, because he's building a brand new, right? So there's no renovation. There's nothing redeemable, right? It's Christ's new creation.
It's a heart transplant.
Exactly.
We're going to shine this one up. No, we're going to give you a new heart.
We're not putting a stent in. And David kind of spoke this in Psalm 119:11. Thy word that I have hidden in my heart, that I might not sin against it. Right. So the idea here, and I'm trying to keep with this theme of the kingdom, right? So the idea here is if we hide this in our heart, and we're in right standing and we're in righteousness, then we're going to be more successful and more able to live out that kingdom lifestyle, to step into that promised land, right? Because we're not righteous, but He is. So we can pray for righteousness, but we can't be righteousness and still walking in the ways of the world. So that's where we're going to have to act in faith, to be able to step out away, right? And to be able to understand that the arrows are going to come, but that it's coming from a defeated enemy. You want to talk about the perspective? I guess I can start it out here. We always get into this with the law, and we'll get into it more, but there's this difference between the old covenant and the new covenant, right? The law, and we'll have this discussion we had this morning, but Galatians 2:16, knowing that man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ, even we have believed in Jesus Christ, that we may be justified by the faith of Christ and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. No one is justified by the law. So,
and yet, let me throw in there, the same person wrote, for it is not hearers of the law who are righteous in the sight of God, but the doers of the law will be declared righteous, Romans 2:13. So you think, oh wait, Paul, are you schizophrenic? Or what's going on here?
Right. So then he'll go on in Galatians 3:24, and I'll just read here. Wherefore the law, our schoolmaster, to bring us unto Christ, that we may be justified by faith. But after faith has come, we are no longer under the schoolmaster. So what he's saying here is that the law, and we'll talk about this, we'll have our debate, but what he's saying here is that the law was these guideposts, kind of like you do with a child, and you're trying to raise them up, right? You're giving them bounds to live within the law because Christ hasn't come yet. So there's these boundaries. Like, have you ever been bowling? If you bowl like I do, you need the bumpers up, on each side, right? So that's kind of the law. It's the bumpers up, right? And then that's before Christ, because the law can't save. They still had to do the atonement once a year, and they had to have the blood sacrifice and all that for the forgiveness. But the law are these bounds to keep us from wandering off. And then once the Christ came, then if you follow Jesus and you're pure in your heart and with love, then the law is not an issue. I think that's what he's trying to say. It's not that the law is bad. Some interpretations point it that way. It's that if you're following Jesus, and you have righteousness in your heart, and you have the love of Christ, and you're actually doing that, then the law is implicit. You don't have to go chase the law, right, because you're naturally going to do the law, right? Go ahead, Chris.
And so he says in Romans 7:12, the law, this is Paul, the law is holy, the commandment is holy and righteous and good. This whole context of, especially Galatians, is this group of people, and we have people who focus on one thing and then they make, to the exclusion of everything else, they make salvation required on this one thing.
Yeah.
There were those people in Judaism that were doing that, Judaizers they were called. And they were saying you had to keep the law in order to be saved. But we're reading in Deuteronomy that that's not true. They were already saved and then they were given the law. Jesus says in John 15, I didn't write it down. If you love me, you will obey my commands. And my friends are those who obey my commands. Lay down your life. And so it's like you're given this gift, and then in response, you want to obey it.
Yeah.
And it's actually, someone counted, there's actually nearly twice as many commands in the New Testament as in the Old Testament. Do's and don'ts. But we don't look at them as burdens because it's like bear one another, be with one another, all of one another's. And it's like we do that because we have Jesus in our heart. And that's what God wanted his people to be. He didn't expect them to be perfect because that's why you have the atonements and all that.
Right.
They were like, he wanted devotion, not perfection.
2 through 3. Who'd like to read?
The Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. The Lord did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with us. Those who are here today, all of us who are alive.
Chris, you want to?
So Horeb is another name for Mount Sinai. Anytime you see Horeb, that's Mount Sinai. This is interesting because he actually did make the covenant with their immediate fathers. Now some translations, I think, say forefathers, implying Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now we know that's, that would make this a correct statement. It was with that generation. But there's a sense on, if this is your faith tradition, then you were there when all this was happening. And it'd be like if we envisioned ourselves at the foot of the cross as Jesus was being crucified. And so they teach that every Jewish person was there when the law was given. And you go, well, that's kind of silly. And they would say, that's right. It's a story. It's a teaching. It's a way of thinking about it and imagination. And you want to talk about imagination.
But it is true, because the seed that was in
Yes.
them that passed,
Yeah.
brought forth us at this late date in God's history, not ours.
Mm-hmm.
So the seed was there. Abraham's seed was all of Israel, but it was also other nations, and it's neat.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's true, the seed was there, not the person.
No, I agree with
It's
you.
like a 2,000, 3,000-year-old tree that just has a new leaf, right? We're the leaf, but we're still connected to the tree.
We had a discussion this morning about imagination. One of the things that Jesus said is that you need to be like the children, right, to come to Christ, right? And you think about children, and one characteristic of children is that they have this amazing imagination. And I think a lot of the Old Testament, they had great imagination. Even in biblical days, they had tremendous imagination. And I think one of the things the enemy has successfully done is taken our imagination, right? And they do that a lot of different ways, whether you want to, and they could use good things, right? Like the rapture would be a great thing, right? But it can also be a terrible thing in some sense, because you could be so focused on the rapture that you're of no good here, right? So you look at the fruit of the person, that has the sticker that says this car will be unoccupied when Jesus comes, right? Well, they're not living out what they're supposed to be doing here, right? Because we're supposed to be making heaven on earth as it is in heaven, right? And so what we see here is that imagination. And a lot of us, if you think back, just even a few generations back, like some of the early works of our founding fathers when America was founded, they had tremendous. If you'll know, that was way before Israel was a nation. So they saw America as the New Jerusalem. They imagined that. They imagined it. That's why they wanted a covenant with God when they made the nation. That's why that we have a Bill of Rights that has 10 things on it, paralleling the 10 Commandments, right? So there's a lot in here about an imagination. And if we would have that imagination, we're a child of the Creator. We want to create. That's the kingdom, the promised land. We should create His righteousness here, and we should be doing that as opposed to creating fear, right? The enemy wants to get inside of us, and we end up creating fear instead of righteousness and faith and the kingdom and the promised land. So anything else before we get into the biblical illustrator? So I put an excerpt here on the biblical illustrator, and I think this is a key thing here. When he says he did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with us. And then he says, those who are here today, all of us alive. You need to get the full weight of this statement. And this is something that a lot of times they don't really teach from the pulpit because it goes dark and, we want to be encouraging, right? But understand that the people he's talking with, they saw their fathers fall. They literally trudged the desert for 40 years and their fathers all are dead. And this is a very pointed statement directly to that audience right when he said it, which is why I think the translation says fathers here. It could probably mean multiple things, but that's the way I interpret it. Now, the biblical illustrator has a really kind of a good way for us to apply that to us. So for the last day of the year, here it says, this text applies to many of us this day. It was not applicable last year. Thousands have been born just this year. And he says this text applied to many last year who is not applicable now, right? They were alive, but now are inhabitants of the tomb, and their souls have entered an eternal state. And then he says this could be many different ways, right? Some were expecting it, were aged, infirmed, afflicted, and they were waiting that time. Others were reckoning they had many years to come. They had a fruit. I mean, look, we have the millennial class has had more unexpected deaths than any time in history right now as we're speaking. So they were reckoning they had plans, they had full hearts, and all this came upon them. Others, we fear, were unprepared, aliens to God, strangers to repentance, faith, and holiness. Many, we trust, died in the Lord, with their race ended, warfare accomplished, crown received, forever with the Lord. I mean, we have to understand that this is applicable to us. The very people you go sit with in church, and the next hour, they may not be here next year. And time is short. We don't know. God knows our days. We don't. But we know His Word, and that is the life is but a handbreadth, right? So, and then it's applicable to now, those that ascended. It is wonderful that we are here amidst dangers, disease, and death, right? I mean, think about that. That's very applicable to the whole pandemic thing that we went through, right? We all made it through, right? It's entirely owing it to the goodness of God and the patience. How about His patience here? Look at abortions in our country. He rightfully could just wipe America off the planet. We would deserve it on the abortion figure alone. Not to mention lighting up Easter in the fake rainbow colors in downtown New York and all the other atrocities that we've done.
Pornography.
Yeah, the pornography, the biggest pornography in the whole world is here. The child sex trafficking, all that kind of stuff. We are alive under increasing responsibilities. Many blessings have been given to us this year, for all of which we must give account, right? So we should be accountable for those blessings. Like when you do get saved and your car breaks down, hopefully you're immediately praising the Lord, right? Immediately, right? Because we need to be very thankful when He shows up, and we need to be praising Him, that we are that fortunate and that loved, and that we have Him even when we're in the storm. He's in the boat with us, right? He didn't promise a smooth ride to the other side, but He said you will get there. Being alive, we should be filled with the gratitude, and our lips, our hearts, and our lives should show forth praise, right? Praise without ceasing. Right? We are alive. Let us now resolve to live even more for God. I thought that was a kind of an interesting way to bring us forward to, it's not that much different than those children in Israel that saw the wilderness wandering, saw the people fall, and now it's up to them. Speaking of kingdom, to kind of get back to the kingdom thing, is how many of us know that our parents, generations, they didn't have that peace of the kingdom. They didn't have that peace, that God offers. They didn't have that abundant life, right? Maybe something stopped them. Maybe you have parents that did. I don't know. But I know that's available to me, right? So I want to be like Joshua. I want to not look from the left to the right, and I want to be able to step firmly forward in the kingdom, knowing that He's going to give me the land everywhere I set my foot. The abundant life is up to me to a large degree. And abundant may mean different. It's not in a worldly abundant term. It's an abundant life as Jesus would have, right?
And being faithful and obedient.
Thoughts, questions? Sorry, I got a little preachy there. But 4 through 6.
I got it. The Lord talked with you face to face on the mountain from the midst of the fire. I stood between the Lord and you at that time to declare to you the word of the Lord, for you were afraid because of the fire, and you did not go up on the mountain. He said, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage.
So there's a couple things here. Face to face, and again, this can't be literal because Moses had to cover his face, and no one can see God's face and live. But it's an intimacy and the closeness that we talked about before. In the pagan world, their gods were unknowable. Their gods could do whatever they want. You had to appease them because you didn't know if whatever you did might make them angry, and you know. But here he's telling his people exactly what he wants and what he expects, and he's also don't miss God. You know, mankind makes a mountain, and we try and climb it, and we reach God. Our God, comes down, just like Jesus did, came down to earth. And so we see this parallel here of God coming down and bridging that gap because we can't bridge it. He's bridging it, and so there's this intimacy here, and so they're afraid because they're not used to this. They're used to pagan gods where you got to bow to this god and bow to that god and sacrifice to the sun god and sacrifice to the moon god. But he says no.
Put your Asher pole on the hill.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know.
And I love the fact that Moses declares to you the word of the Lord. So Moses isn't a legislator, and he's interceding. Because I went up, because you were afraid to go up, so I went up.
Yeah, what hit me when you read it this time, or when Mary Beth was reading it, was they were afraid. Catch that?
Mm-hmm.
Put yourself there, right? Like, had they said, no, we're not afraid, we know the Lord loves us, and they all went up to the mountain.
Blessing.
Yeah, do you think they would have been scared of the giant? And we know how many times he tells us not to fear. Mm-hmm. And yet they are afraid to go up right here. And this is like that first sin where the enemy kind of came at them and said they were afraid.
Well, you just said it in the previous verses, that the country they came out of, they were fearful of their gods because they had to appease them. And later in Deuteronomy, it talks about going to other countries and worshiping gods made of stone, wood, and whatever, and being fearful in the morning, wishing it for the night, and at night, wishing it for the morning because my heart melts within me. Well, they only knew bondage. They only knew Egypt. I'm not excusing their behavior, but all humans tend to do this. We go in the tradition of our parents because that's the way we're taught. And if they were afraid, then we're afraid. Yeah. Until we make a conscious decision not to be. And Moses made that conscious decision.
Yeah, but I would say, some of us learn differently.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, like Chris and I, we do have that in common with a very broken home. So, I learned what not to do.
Right.
Yes.
So I saw what my parents did, and I said, I see where that leads.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. So certain things that had appeal, even have appeal to my kids, have zero appeal to me because, I saw my dad being convicted and sentenced by Sandra Day O'Connor in federal pen, and I visited him in prison, and I did all these things, so that left a mark on me as a child at 9 years old. When you see your dad in an orange jumpsuit, it changes your perspective on things, right? So so we all have different things, but what I will say is that they were in that land of idolatry in Egypt, and idolatry was huge in Egypt with all the gods and all that. And is our country any different?
No.
No. The idols have changed, maybe. Maybe they're new trappings, But in many ways, they're not that much different, right? I mean, we've even talked about that with Ishtar, the god of Ishtar, right? Which is the Easter, and even in ancient times, she had the maidens that were men dressed as women, and she had rainbow colors and flags and all that. So a lot of this has not.
So this verse 6, again, it's the first commandment in the Jewish faith. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the house of slavery. And one of the comments on why it's the first commandment is if you are okay with this, then you're going to not have any problem with the rest of it, because you're believing and you have faith, and it gives you a reason to have gratitude. And so I wonder if we had made, when we see the statues in the courthouses, if this was I am the Lord your God, what would our country be if that was number one? And of course we would phrase it, I am the Lord your God, not who brought you out of Egypt, but who died to set you free from the bondage of sin. Then come these acts of obedience that God wants from you. And I just think it's one commentator said this statement is supposed to drive gratitude because of what God did for you, and you're supposed to remember what God did. Gratitude's hard. I mean, gratitude's a learned skill.
Okay, let's do 7 through 10.
You shall have no other gods before me.
Oh, it's on the back.
Oh, it's on the back. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments.
Okay, so let's take this one at a time. First, the no other gods before me. That's one that we can easily pass by, but we all put many times gods before us. And our gods could be our children, could be our wallet, it could be sports, anything that you invest or you put as a priority above God. Even look at your time. How much time do you do that, or your job? Are you honoring God in your job, even your work, right? So, that's an important thing. The other thing here, which I thought was interesting in that McGee pointed out, was that there was, this was a problem dating all the way back to the Tower of Babel. So the Tower of Babel, they built a tower, and then according to his thing there, that they tried to make themselves equal with God, and then he says that they actually worshiped the sun because that was post-flood, and they were trying to worship the sun. The sun dried out the land, and they actually did sacrifices on the top of that. So this goes all the way back to the Tower of Babel. Now, interestingly enough, McGee points out that an atheist and atheism didn't really start until the time of King David. And they said that God's movements and his miracles were so great that no one could deny that there weren't gods. So they fought polytheism, and all that, but no one would be brazen enough, to say that there were no gods, right? It's like the scripture says, the fool says there is no
Right.
God, right? Well, the term fool there means that you're insane. We all see the gods all around
Yes.
us. So if you can't even see the gods around us and you say that there's no God, then you truly are insane, right? And we see that even in the New Testament with Jesus, right? Even the people that were against Jesus, they didn't deny that there was a God. They didn't even deny that his miracles, right? They couldn't deny the miracles. They were self-evident, right? And that's, I thought was interesting.
Even in the language, like today, I find it interesting. What do they say? I believe the science. I trust the science. Well, that's a faith statement. You're putting your faith in that, So they may claim not to follow a God, but they're following a God. I think where we really see false gods is our entertainment, including sports. I love sports, but
Social media, too.
Yeah.
People are fully committed to social media. I mean, they live through social media. I see it on Facebook. I see it on all of them. I mean, if you're that consumed by any one thing, you're definitely not putting God first.
and entertainment's getting more overt. Just watch the Super Bowl halftime, and you'll see the Satanism. But so gods are all around us, little G's. This inflicting. I kind of chewed on this one this week. I don't have an answer. Inflicting the punishment of the fathers on the children third and fourth generations. I mean, it sounds like God's putting a curse on future generations, which that's not God, right? God wouldn't do that. But then what you see is grace, though, and that should actually probably be showing favor to thousands of generations. So what I see is generational sin. That's the way I see it. It's like if I had chosen to follow in my father's drinking and my father's drug use, then that is his sin putting on me, and you're in the same boat. But because we break generational sin, or we try to, we're still broken people, then God shows favor. But it's not an easy statement. But
Well, when I was born, I had 16 generational sins on my shoulders when I popped out of the room. And one of them was bitterness, one of them was malice, one of them was deceit, one of them was divorce, one of them was alcoholism. So that's 5 out of the 16 that I had popping out of the womb. And I was unaware.
from your parents or grandparents.
And great-grandparents, and because it
Yeah.
wasn't dealt with in their lives, they did not break that curse. It came to me.
Yeah, there's a great book, I think I've recommended it here, from the witch doctor about the curses and covenants and all that, which is quite fascinating read. But, not to scare you, because we have victory over that.
Yes,
But
we do.
there is some power to that, that we have victory over that, and there is
Christ.
some, yes, but there is some bent, being the father of 4 adopted children, there's some bent
Yes.
there that's nature, even my father, he had addiction kind of issues. You know, he could be addicted to anything. It really didn't matter. It'd be salt or Coke or like the kind you drink out of a can, and the nose on both. But you know, he could be addicted to anything. He had that addictive personality. But it's not that he couldn't tap into God to have that permanent victory.
Yes.
You know, there were certain things he had victory over, but other things he never conquered. He just never conquered those demons, if you will. Now he's still in heaven. I know where he believed in his heart, and he had plenty of time to read the Bible. So, you know, I know where his heart was, but he didn't have that abundant life, right? And then that's where, you know, I want to be different, right? I want that abundant life. I want that promised land. And, you know, I pray that as I pursue that, as God gives me more righteousness, and as I try to lay down more of my will and I walk in His, then eventually my kids are going to see the chasm between me and them, and they're going to want that. And they're going to want to turn towards, not me, but they're going to want to turn towards the Lord, because they're going to say, you know, my dad's one of those Jesus freaks and all this, but later on in life, when they see where the chasm is, they're going to go, maybe there is something to being a Jesus freak, right? And that's hopefully one of my ministries. So
But it doesn't seem consistent to me that God would curse a child just for what their parents did. So I think there has to be, that the child is continuing to be disobedient. I think that's why he follows up, showing mercy to those who love me. And
it all goes down to the free will,
Yeah.
right? If we did not have a choice in the matter, then it wouldn't be love.
Right.
Right. So let's go on to 11.
You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain.
Okay, do you want
We
to
start?
start this?
So vanity is like emptiness is another thought. So treat it lightly, treat it empty, treat it as if it has no value. And I definitely agree that vocabulary is a part of that, but I think it's not just words, it's also deeds. So if you're acting, and I thought of a couple analogies. You ever follow like a truck that's got like a company logo on it and they're driving erratically? You don't necessarily think about the driver, you think about, well, what's that company like? So he's reflecting poorly, or she reflecting poorly on their company that they're advertising. Well, what do we do when we're, say, I'm a Christian, or someone who's got the Jesus fish on the back of their car and they're, you know, cutting people off and flipping people off, and like, well, you just taken the name of the Lord in vain. So I think there's that aspect of it too. I heard early on that it's another way to read this is like don't take on the name of the Lord in vain, like an ambassador. So it's about who you represent and how you're living your life reflecting Him. It's not to be.
I would say all of what he said is true, and definitely that, but I say the literal also is true, in that, you know, the one act that we know the thief on the cross got into in paradise was defending the Lord.
Mhm.
That was his only act, right? That we know biblically that he actually did. I mean, he didn't even say the magic Roman words, or you know, the Roman road, or get baptized or anything else. He just defended the Lord, right? So the word is also clear that if you don't defend me, you know,
Right.
then I'm not going to defend you in front of the Father. So one of the things I've noticed that I just grates on my nerves is when someone says the Lord's name in vain in front of me, right? So I don't let that go. There's been a long time that I did let that go, but I don't let that go anymore. I try to say it tactfully, but I just say, hey, look, you can say the F word, you can do whatever you want, but just don't take the Lord's name in vain. That personally offends me, you know, and I just call them out on it. And 90% of the time, they'll appreciate that. You know, people say this unconsciously, like they don't understand what they're actually saying. And you know, I think that is a good thing to do. I think it is a good thing to defend the Lord and proclaim Him, so that, and it's also a good testimony, because there's always people in the room that all heard it, and they're all too scared to say anything. So if you're the one that's going to step out in faith and say it and call it like it is, otherwise silence is consent. So if you don't say anything, you've just consented to it, and you're not being a good ambassador. right? So then we go all the way back to the other, right? So, anything else? Let's go to 12 through 15. Now, understand that we're transitioning here, so all of these have kind of been negative. Now we're going to go more to the positive commandments here. So, at least for this section. And some of these are not going to be upwardly, but they're going to be more horizontal as we go forward. So, go ahead, 12 through 15.
It says, observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. The seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your ox, nor your donkey, nor any of your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. That your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. And remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. The Lord your God brought you out from there by a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day.
So one of the longest expositions is on the commandment that we don't think we need. Right? We follow the Ten Commandments. We'll accept that one because we don't. And this gets back to my thought earlier of if Satan wanted to teach the church how to not close to God, would he do anything different than what we've been taught about the Sabbath?
Yes.
It's as if God has a standing appointment with us one day a week, say, I want to meet with you. And we say, and that's, I'm getting convicted on this because it's like, yes, if you look at how modern Judaism practices it, they go like way over the top. You can't push an elevator button because that's working on the Sabbath, you know. But we go the other extreme where we say, thanks God, don't need you. And Cody talked about how it's a transition. If you look back in the Exodus version of this, it's all about for the Lord God created in 6 days and on the seventh day he rested. There's your vertical. Here it's about being with your family, giving your staff a day off. It's about horizontal. And so I think you see the first part of the Ten Commandments is definitely about our relationship with God. And then you see this one kind of both. This is a transition. And then all the ones after this are going to be about ethics and relationship with each other. And so you see love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself really acted out in these commandments. And so it's, so is this from McGee, this first sentence?
Yeah.
And I think that's what we've been taught, right? I mean,
yeah.
But if you look at how Jesus treated the Sabbath, he elevated it. He says, no, your silly rules are getting in the way because it's about being with God. And it's about communing. It's about and how different would our world be if all of us unplugged for 24 hours and spent time with our family and got outside and didn't shop, didn't go online, you know, so like, wow, this is I know some Messianic Jews and they look at this saying, why do you Christians think this is a bad thing? This is not a burden. This is a joy. This is a celebration, and we're welcoming meeting with our God, getting that taste of the kingdom one day a week.
Yeah,
the kingdom that we're all looking forward to, and then we say we don't want the kingdom.
This is definitely one place where I disagree with McGee on his take of the Sabbath. But to Chris's point, I tend to go back to the Genesis, that it was a rest, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a rest, it's an appointment. And the rest, the word there is enjoyment. So if something gets you closer to his creation, which was made for your enjoyment, then if something isn't work to you, like, let me just give you an example. I enjoy getting on my zero-turn mower. So I'm not going to view that as work.
Right.
You know, some people that may be work for them. But for me, it's relaxation. I'm like on the land. I get to see how beautiful it is when I'm done. I get that sense of accomplishment.
Mm-hmm.
It's something I can't do during the week. You know, it's peaceful. I'm out with nature, you know. So I think we take too literal of a thing with this, you know. If I want to go on my paddleboard, that's enjoyment.
Yes.
That's not work. That's enjoyment. God didn't need to rest. Not like he was tired, right? On the seventh day, it was him to enjoy, right? And we have so many things around us that we're not enjoying, whether it's our family, it's creation, it's all of these things. And we're not taking, taking the time to enjoy, right? And enjoy the blessings we do have. We tend to think about the things we don't have instead of focusing on the things we don't have instead of, enjoying the things we do have, right?
And one of the guys this morning said we're just so programmed to think of all the things that are not being done. We have to go and do, and we can't rest. We're an anxious society, and this is the antidote for that. And it's the one the church says you don't need to do. We're just throwing it out there.
You want to do?
You don't need to do any of these, right? It's like you want to do them. So.
Right.
Yeah, we got through 16 in the morning, so. keep
Okay,
going.
so somebody want to read 16 and then we'll wrap it up.
Honor your father and mother, as the Lord your God has commanded you, that your days may be long, and that it may be well with you in the land of the Lord your God leads you. Now, I read a little bit more on this. If you didn't honor your mother and father, you was killed.
And if you dishonor them, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But Paul even picks up on that. There's this promise, and you're looking at it going, okay, what does that have to do? What does me being kind to my parents have to do with my days being prolonged? And it's just maybe there's no direct answer, but it's just that's the way God sees it. And Paul picks up on this in Ephesians 6, and it doesn't. A couple of things I saw. It doesn't say. You think it would say love your father, but your mother, but it says honor. So even if they aren't worthy of love, and even if they aren't necessarily worthy of honor, you still honor them. And another way I saw that you can honor them by doing the opposite, by not following in their footsteps when you shouldn't follow their footsteps. That is in a roundabout way. I'm honoring you. I'm going to be your child that is honoring to God, and that's honoring.
You know, we're children of God even when we disobey. He doesn't look at us as not his children even when we disobey. So likewise, we should look at our parents and we should honor them even if they didn't fit the mold, even if they missed the mark. And like Chris said, I thought that was very insightful. You may not love them, you may not like them, but you're required to honor them. And then if you think about this from a practical standpoint and you go back out, because understanding the Bible when it says your mother and your father, it also means your grandmother, your grandfather, up. And how far have our values slipped? Even in our generation, my kids don't value what I value. And then I know I don't value like my great-grandfather valued things, all because we didn't honor our parents then, we didn't honor our parents now, and it keeps going lower. And look at our land. Look at where we are. If we'd honored, our parents, we'd have kept some of those morals that are right here, and our land wouldn't be so broken down. Right? And that's one of those things, that we definitely need to fix our land. Go ahead.
When my mother was 90, I finally reconciled with her. I'm glad I had the opportunity. My father was already gone, but I felt that through her that I had forgiveness, because when I was young, and up until the day I apologized to her, I didn't recognize her authority in my life because it was God-given. Once I apologized to her, it's not that we had a wonderful relationship after that, no. But the walls that were between us crumbled. Many that she had put up, something I had put up. But recognizing that. And she lived to be 98, and that was God. But she honored her mother, who was very evil. In her lifetime, because the Lord had commanded it. So.
Yeah, I thought of you guys in the military would know this, right? You salute the rank, not the person.
That's right.
I think it's the same thought here.
Right, and then, I look at my children, which aren't really honoring me right now, and they're having a real rough time with things, right? So I think there's some truth to that, in the natural, right? Not just in the spiritual, right? I guess that's it. That's a wrap. We'll finish the rest of this next week when we get into the